Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. Thanks for tuning in. I have with me today Sheree Fitch. She's one of the liveliest writers in Canada. She writes children's books, but she also writes for adults. Hi, Sheree. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks, Leslie, for having me. Thank you.
Look, I know that writers don't stay the same. It's not a static thing. Writers change all the time. You write for kids, and you also write poetry for adults. But who are you now?
Simply discombobulating, jumbled up and mumbling, topsy-turvy, tumbly, tipsy-tummy, tied knots. Leslie, who am I? I am many discombobulating things. That's such a great question. I keep thinking that a writer is a writer. Whether I'm writing a play, whether I'm writing an adult play, whether I'm writing a children's nonsense poem, which to me is still one of the most challenging art forms, I should say. It's about the process. I mean, you hear that all the time, but it truly is that act. Right now, I think I'm trying to write my first novel. Who knows? It's wonderful though, because I don't know, I've never done this before. I feel like I'm back where I was 20 years ago.
Growing and
writing
changing,
for the writing for
figuring it
the
out as you
sake
go
of
along.
writing. It might not ever see the light of day. That's okay. So, but I still will and will always consider myself, a writer of literature, a writer of children's nonsense. Yeah. It's a title I have no problem claiming. It truly is a literature which brings me great joy. And I like to think I've made a few kids happy too along the way. So.
But that's interesting. That's where a writer is. You're living with the thing that you're creating at the time, and what the public is seeing, of course, is something you wrote a year ago or 2 years ago, as if that's your latest book. But you're not there. You're at this other place.
That's
and
right.
It is the process, isn't it?
That's right. And it's like it's all the parts of you. I mean, I was inspired to write nonsense poetry for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had small children. My son Jordan is now 25 and Dustin is 19. Thank goodness we've gotten to that point. And the motivation for that genre really did come, Leslie, from the everyday things that happen in our lives, sprinkling it with imagination. Also, of course, nonsense poetry and rhymed poetry is still the most musical of poetry, so it was a great genre for me who loves the musicality of poetry.
Yeah, you love the language.
Yes,
and you love
I
the
do.
sound of language.
Yes,
Where did that come from in your life?
It came from, I think, from growing up in a home where language was alive. A father who recited, "Oh, wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being," and I always say that the Romantics would have rolled over in their graves because my father did things like "Who shot poor Albert Cross" instead of "Who shot the albatross." There was this incredible, but my dad. Incredible wordplay is what I want to say. Mum did chicory chick chilla chilla chickala romina banana kabalaka wallaka can't you see chicory chick is me. Incredible love of the oral tradition. And Dad also used to say, "Dad, tell us stories with your mouth talking." And the mouth talking stories were the ones that he had invented. And so I truly think that love of the spoken word came to me first. And for me, it will always be the sound of language coming in through the ear that I think I will be attracted to the most, more than actually the written words on the page.
Now, isn't it one of your characters in one of your books who, in order to figure out something, stands at the kitchen sink or at the counter or something like that? Is this part of where, when you're figuring out the rhymes, you're not sitting at a computer, I don't think, most
Never.
of the time. They're working. Where are they coming
Never.
from?
For me, it's, and I remember, meeting Dennis Lee years ago, and then when I did my thesis in children's literature, and talking to him about this, and I'd interviewed him, and there is a kind of music you feel inside, and there's a rhythm there, and it's almost like you start to put, it's a kinesthetic thing, and you feel it in your body, and then you start to put the words to it. I really believe that it starts with this inner music, and so a writer is really a listener, and sometimes it might come out in this simply discombobulating, nonsensical way, very lyrical, and other times it depending on what you're listening to, it will be a slower rhythmic thing.
Can you give me a sample? Give me one of those poems.
Ah, gosh, a slow one, a fast one,
in between.
In between.
Or anything.
An adult, oh gosh, oh Leslie, if you were me and I were you for just a day or maybe two, then maybe you and maybe me would see the me that you were too. You see, the you I see you try to be never ever speaks to me. See, if you knew the me I am, or I could know the you be, I think we would eventually discover we liked broccoli. Yeah, we could form the broccoli bunch, invite each other out to lunch, share our little broccoli trees, cover them with melted cheese. But you pass me by without a smile as if I were a crocodile, then look the other way in case you see the me that's in my face. If you could wear my sneakers, you might have to plug your nose, and I could wear your shoes even if they scrunch my toes. Then maybe you and me could see the us we never got to meet, the you and me that might have found more broccoli to eat.
There it is, Sheree Fitch, live poetry today. Does that, when you perform that for kids, how does that break down the barrier between you, the adult, and young person?
That's a really good question, Leslie. I mean, you see, I truly believe that you never grow too old for nonsense poetry. This thing about it being children's poetry and adult, it's poetry to me, and if you have a child inside you, I think you can still like, I knew a bagel who loved bagels. In fact, he loved to bake for bagels. It's wordplay. But when I go to schools, and sometimes, you know, I've been doing it for a long time, so, and now people seem to know that sometimes you have authors come into schools and they give readings. But I had a little boy come up to me maybe 2 years ago now, and I did the performance. I call it a performance when I read the poetry.
Sure.
It's a performance with words. So I did the tongue twisters, and we had fun, and they participated. And as they were going out of the gym, this little boy came up to me and he said, "You didn't answer my question." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, what is it, dear?" And he said, "Are you a little lady or a real woman?" and I think he meant, like, are you a child with an old face? Like,
yeah.
I think, and I said that, and that's what I said to him.
Because you're not acting like an adult. Adults are supposed to be serious.
I don't know what he couldn't, like, who the heck are you? Who am I? Leslie, there it is again. But there was this sense of that the space you enter into, this word place, is a very magical space. I mean, I truly believe that. I always say in the moment of the telling of the poem or the story, there is the creation of a safe place. I think that's why I write. I still think that's why I write. I also think that's why in the nonsense poetry, in that tradition, it's a celebratory mode. It's a place to rejoice for me. The adult poetry, of course, is less that. But in the moment of the telling of it, when there's a reciprocal thing happening with an audience of children, I would say especially, it has happened in the adult world as well, but there is something quite magical in that.
And I've seen that happen, of course. I've seen you with an audience, so the connection is rather electric.
It's going somewhere, you know, somewhere else, and I'm very happy I can go there,
yeah.
you know.
That Sneakers poem, I think, was from the book that was dedicated to children's rights. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about that children's rights issue.
Yeah, it's UNICEF asked me to do the book. My first response was to say no, I cannot do a book about children's rights. It's too serious a topic, and I do nonsense, and I don't want to violate nonsense either. I thought it would be a really yucky thing to do. When they sent me the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I started reading about it. Still called them back and said, I don't think I'm your woman. I think there's other writers who could do it better. And then one day I was in my writing room, and I don't know, Leslie, whether you'll believe me or not, but a lot of writers would. I was sitting there. I wouldn't lie to you. A little elephant came right into my writing room, tapped me on the trunk, on my shoulder with his trunk, and there was the beginning of, you know, did you hear the elephants trumpeting last night? And this poem, I felt like I was dictating it. I truly did. It was being dictated to me, I think. I should put it that way. I was the medium in that particular. When I was done, I had this poem about an elephant, and I realized it was also a poem about not going to war. And I thought, you know, I couldn't use animals for a book about children's rights, could I? I mean, that would be nonsense. And then I went, that's what I do. I do nonsense. I think I just figured out a way to do the UNICEF book. So I used animals, but it's amazing because, you know, sometimes I'll say in this life, I think you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like, a lot of people have really responded really well to that book, but people, you wouldn't believe when I found out people saying, oh, the last thing we want today is for children to know their rights. That's the trouble with the world today. And so to me, there's this big mix-up between what rights and needs are, and wants and privileges and responsibilities that go with that. So I thought, I'm even happier now than I was before that I've done this book, because at least maybe it's a book meant to spark a dialogue.
And I guess parents thought that kids were going to start suing their parents or something if they understand their rights, but it's not that at all.
No, it's about the right to an education, the right to a home, the right to a name, the right to be loved and not abused. I mean, but it's nonsense poetry, and those poems are used as a springboard. There's a mix and match at the end of the book, and it's to start a dialogue. So I don't try to teach the rights in the poems. I don't think I try to do that. I tried not to do that. So yeah, it's a very different kind of book. Again, you're right about the changing.
And when you write for adults too, and you had a book of poetry called "In This House Are Many Women," and there's kind of a shape and a place and a very specific community of people there. Who are those folks?
That book, you know, it took over 15 years to write. It's been out, you know, 8 years now, and continues to sell, which is nice. It's got a very nice, quiet little life. I'm very happy I did that book. The first community of women in that book are women in shelter for battered women, and I always make it clear that to me, it's not a book about domestic violence. It's a book about the resilience of women. I mean, that section in particular is what I'm talking about. So to me, they're not books about violence, domestic violence. They're poems, but they're women's voices talking about the strength they find in that community at that particular time. So that, you know, they're pretty raw. It's not Sheree's higgledy-piggledy, I stuck my toes in my nose, right?
But in there's women telling stories, which in a way is something that you do. You're a woman who tells stories.
Yes, and there is a twisted humor in there too at times too, I think. Then the other section is a community of women, just motherhood, support, you know, our friendships, that kind of thing. The third section is a section of a character called Lucy Lament, and that's where I added satiric, you know, shall I wear mascara, should I shave my legs? Will I allow a man to fertilize my eggs? There's a whole section in there of the. I actually have a lot of fun, you know, with adults, men as well, actually, with that section. And the last section is about a woman named Diana who runs away to the moon. And of all those voices from that book, the woman who has come back to speak to me and who wants to have another incarnation is Diana, the moon woman. So I don't know what I do with her now, but she's still there. She's still there.
But it's really interesting that you're concerned with keeping the language alive and vibrant, because there are those other forces that are killing the language, and some of them are academic, and some of them are of the corporate world, and you know, many other places where the language is just losing ground. It's becoming a dead thing. So we need some other kind of injections there to liven it up.
I think, you know, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of spoken word. I'm not really one of those spoken word poets. I'm somewhere in between, but I think the tradition, the oral tradition of poetry, I mean, that's the roots of poetry. People said it out loud. They relayed information that way. That's how they passed on the stories and the legends and entertained the courts, and even plays. You know, when you think of the oral tradition of poetry in Shakespeare, I mean, that's what it was poetry. And the you know, I always want to say the out loud ability of language. I hope we never lose, because in there is such music and such beauty and such cadence. It's that making our ears happy and our hearts sing when we actually, it's also feeling it too, Leslie, as it trips off the tongue. I always talk about the lip slipperiness of language, how delicious it can be. I guess it's my obsession, but I truly have found that people can get infected by actually realizing that the words we speak are a part of us, you know, a part of us.
And when parents read your books to their kids, they take on that role too, don't they? Of the performer, obviously.
I think so. People always say, "Oh, we can't do them like you," and I go, "No, that's not the point. You do them like you do them, not like I do them. The language should speak to you, I hope, in some way if I've written it well." And of course, I also get, you know, "Oh, I wish you'd write another book because, you know, I'm getting sick and tired of doing There Were Monkeys in My Kitchen." I get that too. But it's amazing, Leslie. You know, now like I'm meeting these 23-year-olds that. It's pretty, I know, it's pretty awful. You know, they said, "You came to my school when I was in grade 2. And I go, "No, I didn't. Don't tell me that. I'm not so old." But it's amazing because with children's books, again, you know, there are new babies always being born. So, yes, very soon, I suppose I'll be in second generation, you know.
And people remember those stories for the rest of their lives, though, don't they?
It's incredibly, what can I say? It's humbling, Leslie. No, truly, like it's, you feel kind of blessed or something that you can grow up to do what you love to do, and then to have someone turn around and like a mother, and it's usually the parents that get quite nostalgic about it. Someday maybe the children will, but they'll go, "You know, you were a part of our home while my children were growing up." They will say that to me, and that is like, I know how huge that is, having had children, having had those books. I mean, I got to meet Matt Cohen a couple of years ago, before he died, and he wrote a book called Leaves of Louise years and years and years ago. That came out, and you know, it was, I think, early on in the days of Canadian children's literature publishing, and having a chance to meet Matt Cohen and go up to him and say, "Do you know what that book was my son and I. And,
Sure.
and you know, Jordan still talks about that book. And,
Yeah, Raiders definitely need that kind of feedback.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're
it's
going to take
wonderful.
a short break right now. My guest today is Sheree Fitch, and we're going to go away, and then we'll be right back. Hi, we're back on Off the Page. My guest is Sheree Fitch, and we're talking about her kids' books and her other work as well. You've traveled a lot as a writer, and you've gone to Africa, and you've gone to Bhutan, and I'd like to find out what you learned there. Let's go to Asia first. You went in kind of an official capacity to Bhutan.
I did. It was, you know, one of these serendipity things. I had once been in the Arctic. I met a teacher. She ended up in Bhutan. When she got there and working in the education department, realized there was no children's literature which reflected the culture and heritage of the Bhutanese children. And, you know, there are a lot from Britain, a lot from India, but nothing that was really an indigenous literature. And she'd seen me working in another culture, and she'd seen me working with children, and she said, that's the writer I think we should get to teach writing. And of course I have, as many of us have, you know, taught writing workshops, taught courses at universities to, you know, put the food on the table, Leslie, over the years. And I was thrilled to be asked. I mean, I almost fell off my chair the day it was like, do you do writing workshops? Yes, I do. Do you do reading tours? And then well, it was like, well, how would you like to go to the Himalayas to do that? So
wow.
I did, not all teachers, so I did a week-long writing workshop in a place called Paro, and they were mostly teachers and education people who were interested in kind of like textbook, but like reframing legends. We worked a lot with the oral tradition. Then I went to their college and worked with young writers, I would say the age 17 to 24. That was a really amazing 3-day workshop. Then I went from one end of the country literally to the other end of the country on the road, going into village schools and doing readings. It was their first National Literacy Week.
Tell me how it changed you.
Gosh,
I'm sure you had an impact on the
yeah.
people there, but I'm very much interested in how it affected
Oh,
you.
I feel
as a
that
person.
probably it affected me more than I probably ever impacted them. It did. It was one of those transformative life experiences. I mean, I had studied a lot of Buddhist philosophy before on my own, and but to be in a Buddhist country, for one thing, was that was amazing.
People act differently. They have a different view of life and death.
In Bhutan, they didn't have television. Okay, when I was there, they actually have gotten it in the last year. Their school system started in 1965. So we're talking. Well, I gave a workshop, and for example, at the end of the workshop, the person introducing me said, that principal walked 6 hours up a mountain, Sheree, to come to this workshop today. So, I mean, we're talking not only going halfway across the world, we're talking about going back into a place that truly still seems untouched in many ways. I didn't want to come home, Leslie,
Must have
for
been
one
major
thing.
culture shock. To come back
It was. Even though I traveled before, one of the experiences was I did travel up, walk up a mountain with as a part of a field trip, and we'd gotten special permission to go to this temple, Taksing, and you know, at times there was like a very narrow path, and I'm afraid of heights, and just personally, you know, having said I want to get there more than I'm afraid of falling was something huge. So as a person, that trip, and my husband was with me too. So,
Are you a religious person? Does this fit in any way with things you believe or practice, or?
Oh gosh,
that?
that's such a huge question. You know, the word religious is a funny one. You know, and of course the S word, spiritual, is being bandied about so much these days.
Yes.
How can I tell you? I first questioned the existence of God when I was 5 years old. I woke up at night, my parents found me crying, came running up the steps, said, Sheree, what's the matter? And I said, how do I know God is real if I can't see him? And for an answer, my father lifted me from the stairs to the window ledge and pointed to the stars. And that was my answer. You know, when my son was 5, I wrote a poem called Flannellism, and it goes like this. I can do this, Leslie. It answers your question. I am answering your question. At 5, my son presented me with a picture of a man in a bright red shirt, cowboy hat, and jeans. This is God, he said, but Mom, the shirt is flannel. That's what's important. I put the picture on the refrigerator. I have been a flannelist ever since.
Very nice.
So I'm a lapsed Anglican, I would say, Leslie, you know, with a lot of Buddhist influence. And what I tell people is I'm a flannelist. You know, my 5-year-old son came closer to giving me an image of what I understand God to be than anyone's ever been able to articulate for me. Certainly, there is no question that early on in my writing, I realized it wasn't about me. And I do think that there's an incredible link to something, what Blake would call the divine, and the things that we create, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a dance or a quilt or a, you know, a basket. I mean, I think...
That's right, and writing helps provide those connections, doesn't it, for people? The act of writing, or
yes, I think
the writing that a person reads?
I think so, and maybe not all writing. I mean, maybe when I'm, you know, doing a radio commentary about something that really makes me mad and it's a certain kind of writing, maybe that's not as much of an open-souled thing as when I sit down to write a poem, but it still could maybe all be part of the dance. So it's a very huge question, and you don't want to. I mean, sure. I audited a theology course last year, so it is a big part of my life, and that people don't realize that if you stick your toes in your nose, there's also these flip sides. So thanks for asking, Leslie.
Let me take you to another one of your worlds, a little bit less serious. Upper Millidocket Elementary School?
Upper Millidocket Elementary School.
Where's that, and what's happening there?
Upper Millidocket Elementary School is a school and a chapter book series that I've started. I guess it's a series. I mean, I'm just doing one book very slowly. The publisher is actually being very patient. I'm doing one every 2 years.
And they're for older kids.
They are, and I did them because I was in a school once, and this little boy put up his hand and said, well, Sheree, I really like your poetry, don't get me wrong, but like, when are you going to do a real book? That's
a chapter book.
And I said, what do you mean a real book? And he went, you know, a real book. And I said, do you mean like a chapter book? He said yes, and because I've had a lot of experience with, you know, what they call reluctant readers, having had 2 boys who struggled in that department in school. People think it's because I'm a writer, I'm involved in literacy. It's really because I'm a mother. I thought, yes, why don't I do a book that's really fun and integrates wordplay and does humor and could be for that age group and that thing. Why don't I try to do it?
And there they are. What is that?
One is called The Hullabaloo Bugaboo Day. So as you can see, I didn't give up the wordplay. And the other one is called The Other Author, Arthur. And that comes, Leslie, actually from being in Newfoundland, and Ed Kavanaugh and I both came back at the end of the day, and I said, you know, I had a little girl come up today and say, are you the Arthur? And Ed said, oh yes, they call me the Arthur all the time. And then I've been to schools where they said, are you the other? And so it's like, The Other Author, Arthur is about a visiting author at a school.
And that's quite a world into itself. An author goes out and visits schools around the way. We're going to take another very short break, and we'll be back to say goodbye to Sheree Fitch right after this. I'm really glad you were watching the show today. My guest is Sheree Fitch, and gee, I asked her to give us a 1-minute poem with what's left. Go for it, Sheree.
Okay. It took me 7 years to write this. I just want you to know. It's called The Beagle and the Eagle and the Beluga's Fine Times. I knew a beagle who loved bagels. In fact, he loved to beg for bagels. In fact, he wagged his tail for bagels and haggled for those bagels whenever bugles blew. One day the beagle met a beluga who played the boogie-woogie bugle. The beagle giggled, hi beluga, then played a jig with his kazoo. Then the beagle and the eagle and the bugle playing beluga sailed together, saw the 7 million wonders of the world. It was a boondoggling, mind-waggling, horns-waggling time. They played the boogie-woogie, eager eagle, beagle beluga blues.
There it is.
There it is.
Heard it here on Off the Page. Sheree Fitch, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for letting me do my Beagle Eagle Beluga Blues. Thank you, Leslie.
And I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next time.